All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and before we start this video, I have been invited to the press junket for the Bloodshot film on Friday. I was invited yesterday, so it's a really tight turnaround. And when I did the press junket for Spider-Man Far From Home, a lot of you guys asked, were there questions you could ask, right? A lot of you guys suggested that. Like, next time, hit us up and we can ask some questions, things like that. And I was like, that's actually a pretty cool idea. It's a really good way to get you guys involved, right? To get you guys feeling like you're more incorporated with regards to the channel and me and the press junkets that I get to do and things like that. So here's what I want you guys to do, right? The press junket is, of course, for Vin Diesel, the director, and most of the supporting cast. In the description, you'll find those individuals that I'm actually going to be interviewing as part of the press junket. What I want you to do is I want you to go into the comments section and I want you to post your questions, right? I want you to say Vin Diesel, your question, right? So like the individuals that I have listed, those individuals, their names, question. I want you to follow that format. If you do not follow that format, I'm not going to pay any attention to your question. I'm going to ignore your question entirely because I don't have enough time to kind of filter through what it is that you mean to say and all that kind of stuff because this is in a couple days, right? So I've got to be fast about all this kind of stuff. From there, I'll pick the questions that I think are the most interesting using my own judgment, and then I'll send those off to my contact at Sony to make sure that the questions are copacetic. If not, then we can kind of figure it out from there, and I can go back and pick some different questions. But then yeah, so assuming that it all works out, then who knows? You might get your question asked to Vin Diesel. Vin Diesel might answer your question for you. So we'll see. We'll see what's up. But make sure you guys post those down in the comments, and let's start the video. Okay, so a lot of you guys really seem to enjoy the video that we did on the origin of the Transformers and Cybertron. And so I figured we would cover more Transformers stuff since you guys have really been asking for it, right? Which is nice. I kind of like taking a reprieve from Marvel and DC. I mean, we still cover them, but it's nice to bring in something else, kind of a breath of fresh air, more or less. I don't want to be pigeonholed as a guy that only ever covers Marvel and DC and nothing else, right? So because of that, I want to cover the origin of Optimus Prime and Megatron. Now, here's the funny thing about this is going over these different stories and so on and so forth, but there are different origins out there because like the TV show or the various TV shows are really kind of considered their own universes unless it's specified that one continues after the other. The movies are their own universes, the comics are their own individual universes. Again, unless something takes place in one series that ties it into another, they're usually kind of considered to be their own thing, right? And so the cool thing about this is that when it comes to Transformers Prime and when it comes to Optimus Prime and Megatron, this one I think is the most consolidated and reasonable origin. And the reason why is because it really kind of brings them together, right? Really kind of says that one hand washes the other, so to speak. Insofar that in what you had in the history of Cybertron was what was called the Golden Age. And the Golden Age is one of these instances where nobody was fighting over resources, everybody on Cybertron lived in peace, that kind of a thing. So, not really hippy dippy or anything like that, but just a place where things didn't suck was basically, basically the Golden Age of Cybertron. But as time began to progress, you ran into the same thing you always run into whenever you have multiple groups who are living in the same location. You end up having the creation of social classes. And so what you got was kind of a reflection of the real world, the world in which we live, where you basically had differing hierarchies of social classes, essentially the kind of George Orwell philosophy that everybody is equal, but some are more equal than others, if you guys understand where I'm kind of going with that. Basically, you had these all-powerful ruling classes, and then you had the guys all the way down to the very, very bottom. And for the most part, there was a lot of anger that was brewing at the time, right? There was a lot of resentment, a lot of dissatisfaction that was going on among the masses on the planet Cybertron. And so what you ended up getting is you had Orion Pax and then you had Megatronus. And Megatronus was essentially a gladiator, and using the kind of fame that he was able to draw by the various, the various battles that he won or gladiatorial games that he won, he started to build a kind of following. And using that, he began to sort of, espouse this ideology that things need to change, right? We have to make things better for people. And so the result was that in deriving a kind of following, he in turn had his own audience base. At the same time, what you had was Orion Pax, but Orion Pax didn't really have a following in the traditional sense. He kind of did, but not in the same way that Megatronus did. The way that Orion Pax worked out is he was really more of a clerk working in the Hall of Records. And looking into the past of the golden age of Cybertron, when everything was great for everyone, he looked to sort of return back to that age, but he didn't really see it by means of conquest and conquering. That's not really what he was looking for. Instead, he had more of a philosophical hand and saying we need to return to this era of peace without any bloodshed if at all possible. Now, if some folks got to be killed, well, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, but like we're not going to kill everybody, right? And so as a result of this, well, the two of them really seem to have the same ideologies, that when Megatronus had essentially left the gladiatorial games and then adopted the name of Megatron, really kind of shortening his name down, when he approached the High Council, this is when you really learned what he was about. And what you ended up finding out here is that what he wanted to do was essentially disband and eliminate the High Council and then put himself in place as essentially a dictator of Cybertron. Now, the biggest problem with this, and in reality, if you had something like an enlightened monarch, it wouldn't be the worst thing, right? Because what you would have is a kind of monarchy class where hopefully, generation after generation, people would operate in what's best for the overall, society. In this instance, it's an entire planetary society. And so as a result of that, when he essentially wanted to espouse the idea of becoming a dictator, the biggest issue you run into there is essentially Megatron basically being corrupted by his own power, which was really seemed to be the case given the kind of speech he was making, insofar as, if people have to die, then that's okay, right? Like, it doesn't matter, it's just the way that it's just things go. But it's also one of the only individuals who would be welcome on Cybertron, who would be considered part of the accepted class, as I see it, are individuals who are deemed accepted by me, right? So people who agree with me, right? That's really kind of the philosophy that he was espousing and how it was interpreted. On the other hand of the equation, when the High Council had listened to the arguments of Orion Pax, what they saw was essentially somebody who seemed to model the ideals of the original primes of Primus, which is to say, people who fought on the side of justice, people who fought on the side of equality for all individuals on Cybertron. And so the result of this is that Orion Pax was really sort of favored by the High Council, and the High Council in turn rejected the arguments of Megatron. And so what it did is it led to Megatron turning his back on the High Council and Orion Pax, and then in turn using his followers, which he called the Decepticons, to wage war against pretty much anybody who was not considered to be someone who followed in the ideologies of Megatron himself. And so during this time, because of the fact that the war of Megatron had essentially, more or less poisoned the core of Cybertron itself, meaning it was literally killing Primus, what Orion Pax had done was travel to the core of Cybertron itself. Now, Megatron was on the hunt for the Matrix of Leadership, but the Matrix of Leadership, I guess really for anybody who follows the traditional ideologies of Cybertron, and even those who sort of idolize the Golden Age, really saw it as more of a philosophical / religious relic. It wasn't really just an absolute source of power they could use for their own ends. If you possess the Matrix of Leadership, it stood for something. The Decepticons themselves really looked more to the Matrix of Leadership for the power it possessed, right? Megatron could use that to achieve his own ends. And so, as a result, it was really kind of hunting for the same artifact, but for two different reasons. And this is really one of the more important things here, because when Orion Pax found the Matrix of Leadership, when he found Primus almost kind of took this approach. For those of you guys coming from Marvel Comics, it was very similar to like the Panther God Bass from the Black Panther comics, right? Like when a person's trying to become the new Black Panther, you have to go through a whole bunch of tests, but the final test you go through is basically presenting yourself in your most humble form to the Panther God. And if the Panther God rejects you, it would probably kill you, right? But at the very least, you would not become Black Panther. If the Panther God looks at you and accepts you, then you would become the new Black Panther. And that's more or less what Primus did. That when Primus looked upon Orion Pax and realized that he was there for the purpose of not only helping Primus, but trying to help Cybertron itself, Primus looked upon him favorably and granted him the Matrix of Leadership. Now, what this looks like it indicates is that if Megatron had shown up here, that Megatron would not have received it. That Primus would have just let, things would have just played out however they played out, probably to the doom of all the Transformers, and that really would have been it. The alternative is that, Megatron and his forces would have stormed the core, they would have stormed Primus and then taken the Matrix of Leadership. But regardless of how it possibly could have played out, when Orion Pax was given the Matrix of Leadership, he became Optimus Prime, and then essentially he and the Autobots have been warring against the Decepticons and Megatron ever since, right? So it's a cool origin, right? And I think it's one of the most cohesive, and I think it's one of the most well put together when it comes to the stories of the Transformers. But again, this is one of multiple origins that are out there, right? So to me, I think it's the most recent one as far as I'm aware. Now, again, I just watched the series on Netflix, right? I just watched, I kind of looked at it here and there and then watched the very end of the series where you basically get kind of how this all sort of came together. But I dug it, I was interested in it. It may be that with the recent relaunch of Transformers from IDW, that they may go back and change the origin or give us a new origin. And if they do, of course, I'll cover that. But at the moment, I'm not aware of there being one, although it may be that I just missed it. We're like 20 something issues in, so it may be that I just missed it for some reason or another. But regardless, let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace. I want to say thank you to all of the new patrons who have joined patreon.com/comicsexplained. I want to give a shout out to Henry, Young Typhon, Elias G, David JS, Jacob H, Ben, John H, Jason C, Austin S, Austin H, James O, Chris T, Matt N, Jeff R, Joey M, Steven Z, Sloth Like Lou, David C, John H, Lean and Mean. That guy asks questions all the time. Adam K, Genosis 916. I want to say thank you to all of you all. This list is growing all the time. Thank you for joining the Patreon.